September 21st, 2022, the long-awaited Pacific campaign was released to the surprise of some. Now, this campaign had a lot of hype behind it after the debatable failure of Stalingrad. Today, November 12th, 2022, the Pacific is not considered a failure as Stalingrad was, but many have noticed that the Japanese side of the campaign is almost dead, although that is a slight exaggeration. As there still are some players on that side of the campaign, the numbers seem to continually dwindle, getting less day by day, and the battles become increasingly more and more between bots and Marines. Welcome back to SuperSteel Gaming. It's still Erwood here, and today I want to talk about what happened to the Japanese side of the Pacific campaign. Now, I'm sure we've all noticed that there's not nearly as many Japanese players on the game as there were when it started. It seems like there's a ton of American players, and we find ourselves in a lot of battles where there's very few, if really any, Japanese players, and most of them seem to be very new players who were just checking it out, judged on only rank, of course. So let's go ahead and get into this. If you enjoy this video, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and leave me a comment down below. Also, do not forget to check out Major McDonald's Discord. It is awesome. There are many great community members and content creators on there, including myself, so definitely check it out. Enjoy the video. On September 21st, 2022, when the Pacific campaign was first launched, there was a pretty even spread of players on all sides, even possibly favoring the Japanese slightly, as they had the coolest new technologies, because a lot of people wanted to break the American, Soviet, and German technology trees, and that was quite inviting for many players. But as a rule, most people would agree that it was a pretty balanced campaign at that point. Now, I just want to add a quick disclaimer that from this point on, everything is just based on my opinions on what I experienced playing the American side of the campaign and from what I've heard on Discord and on YouTube. So starting at the beginning, on September 9th, the Let's Start the Pacific Front newsletter was released. Now, as time passed, there was a growing fear that the American faction's technology would be superior to the Japanese even before the devs released the Pacific campaign levels, because a lot of people feared that the Japanese had less powerful technology, especially since this would be the entire Pacific front and not just one single battle. Now, the devs released the Pacific campaign levels on September 15th, only 6 days after it was confirmed, revealing that the Americans got weapons such as the M1 Carbine and M1 Garand fairly early in the campaign, sparking some to worry about the balance of the campaign at once it released. Later weapons such as the Thompson SMG Better Browning variant, Browning M19 18A2, as well as the new Owen Mark 142 Australian weapon and the M1941 Johnson machine gun were also a bit advanced, making some fear that the campaign may be a little bit overpowered in the later levels as well as the lower levels. I even mentioned that issue in one of the videos I did right after that, but in the first few weeks out of launch, the issue seemed to be a pretty much unfounded fear, and the Pacific campaign was fairly popular for a while, as players on both sides were still in the first 10 levels of the tech tree for the most part. But as we entered October, more and more players had made it into the teen levels, and that's when the gap began to form as American players received the M1 Carbine and M1 Garand. As players began to get these weapons, it began to become a pretty big issue for the Japanese, as they were very effective. The M1 Carbine was incredibly effective at close range, being able to overwhelm enemies with an unrivaled amount of firepower. The M1 Garand was able to overwhelm enemies at longer ranges, and with a bayonet could still be very dangerous at close range. The issue came in that the Type High rifle and the Type 99 rifle, the supposed rivals of the latter, had no such effect. These weapons were only partially effective against the Americans, and I only saw them in few numbers. I don't really see them much, as most Japanese players seem to use SMGs, especially if they got the premium one, and bolt-action rifles. I see these much more often than the semi-automatic rifles, as I think the bolt actions seem to be slightly more effective in combat than the semi-automatic ones. Now, the one weapon I will say that I have seen a ton is the Type 11 machine gun. This weapon is very dangerous and is probably one of the most lethal weapons on the battlefield, but it's still very small compared to the amount of M1 carbines and Brownings I see on the field. The biggest issue, though, is that the Japanese early campaign weapons seem to have a very, very little effect on the American counterparts. As we made it through October, though, it seemed as if the gap was very expansive and was continuing to expand. Japanese players decreased in battles and more bots began to be seen, only hurting the campaign by putting more pressure on the ones who were still left. And there was really no answer to the American weapons from the Japanese side or the devs. Another note is that when the campaign came out, the Japanese bombing runs were almost constant. Now they are all but non-existent in many and most battles. As we continue into November, the number of players on the Japanese side seems to continue to drop. In my mind, most just not wanting to play something with an almost 100% guaranteed loss. In most cases nowadays, the battles end in an American victory. Only here or there do I really see a Japanese victory if you just happen to get a bunch of players on it. And when playing as the Americans, you usually will find yourself in defensive battles at least putting up 10 to 15 kills on one soldier before dying, and on offensive battles sometimes even 20 kills on one soldier. In some cases, you'll just be sitting there at a door and mowing down AIs with a Browning or an M1 carbine as they come in. It's basically just become a slaughterhouse for the AIs in the Japanese campaign, as there's basically no players left in most battles. So what happened? The Japanese side of the campaign was supposed to break the Soviet, German, and American tech tree mold and bring some new stuff into the game. Well, I think the answer is actually pretty simple. As more and more American players unlocked tech that some had either already used or that was just more advanced than the Japanese answer to it, it became harder and harder to compete. And once players started leaving, it made it harder and harder on the players still there. Therefore, it started a chain reaction as players left, making it harder on the ones that were still there, making them want to leave, and so on and so forth. The American faction got and is continually getting stronger and stronger. Skilled players are getting sick of their win ratios getting messed up and are leaving. And it was also very repetitive, as the Pacific campaign only has a few maps, and all of that combined I think has basically killed the Japanese faction. Now, I think the important thing to know is that the Japanese side is not completely dead. There are still players who are devout and continue to play, and with some well-coordinated updates, it could possibly save this side of the campaign. Other than Stalingrad, though, I do have to say that this is probably the worst situation we've seen in a faction to date. Although, is this a complete failure of yet another campaign? I would actually say no. The American side is widely enjoyed, and the Japanese side's not completely dead, so you can still find some cool battles. The hate toward the American side seems to have almost dried up, and it provides a pretty cool situation where you can make possibly even more points if you're a newer player or an older player, but especially if you're a newer player, because you have a lack of enemy players, almost getting a custom match, but you're actually able to make points. Also remember that I'm only referring to what I have experienced and what I've heard and what I've witnessed. And you will, of course, find battles that are still tight. I found one the other day, and you will have players on both sides battling it out. So guys, that's about all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment down below. Tell me what your thoughts on it. I'll see you on the battlefield, soldier. This is Still Arrow, signing off.